I'm pleased to say we have a very exciting moment coming up with a live debate about the future of media development. This is an interactive panel chaired live by none other than Georgia Calvin-Smith, who, if you've been watching this program, you will have seen a bit earlier as well in pre-recorded interventions. Well, Georgia Calvin-Smith, who's going to run an interactive panel now, is somebody who works in Paris. She's a journalism trainer, a TV news presenter, and she's worked in international media for over a decade. She runs the daily Eye on Africa bulletin at France 24, and that goes out in English, French, and Arabic. She also anchors the weekly Across Africa magazine show, and to show her versatility, her CV tells us she's also a professor of the Brazilian martial art of capoeira. Well, I think this is going to be a super live interactive panel with Georgia. And I do encourage everybody to use the chat and to share the links to this feed with your networks. Georgia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Guy, for that very thorough introduction. All aspects of my experience touched upon there. But okay, so thank you everyone for making the time to join us for the celebration of the decades of work of the IPDC this morning. So we've just heard about some of the issues and stakes regarding media viability. And I have the honor to say that with me now is a very amply qualified panel to discuss possible solutions to this issue. So I'm just going to quickly crack on with introducing each person, after which each one will offer a quick word on their experience. I'm going to start off with Michal Jestrebner, who is the co-founder and managing director at Sembra Media, a non-profit helping Spanish-speaking independent digital media develop sustainable business models. Now, she's been a professor in the master's program in journalism at La Nación and led courses in entrepreneurship and journalism at a number of prestigious universities in Argentina and the States. At just 22, she launched her own magazine before becoming a digital startup consultant specializing in monetization and management, and that was just at 24. So she co-founded Sembra Media with Janine Warner in 25, and as I mentioned, that's where she is at the moment. Michal, would you like to take a quick moment to expand upon some of your experience and positions?
Thank you, Jordan, and I'm thrilled to be here today with you and discussing this important issue in these difficult times. And I'm just thrilled that we get to discuss the many phases of this crisis media are facing right now, not only through sustainability, but also facing the challenges of global democratic crisis, economic crisis, and also the inevitable challenge of being more inclusive and diverse as a space and as a representation of our society. So today I'm thrilled to hear my colleagues and share what we learn at Sembra Media.
Thanks very much, Michal. Looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So also with us today is Zukiswa Potier. She's the CEO of South Africa's Media Development and Diversity Agency, the Mdda. Now, she was officially appointed to that post at the start of this year, previously having spent a decade as its Chief Director of Strategic Management at Government Communications. Now, her focus is on offering support in creating sustainable, viable, and vibrant community media outfits. She says that for that, meaningful partnerships with government and other sectors of society are key. She's currently researching the development of the first sustainability model for the community and small commercial sectors in South Africa. Zukiswa, welcome. Thanks very much for joining us this morning. Would you like to say a few words?
Good morning, and thank you, Georgia. Excellencies, distinguished guests, fellow South Africans, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Bonjour, sanibonani. The Mdda was established as an independent and impartial jurisdiction person in 2002. Its mandate is to facilitate ownership, control of, and access to the media by previously disadvantaged communities, as well as historically diminished indigenous languages and cultural groups. As a result, all of South African languages can be heard and can be read across the spectrum of the community media in South Africa. However, despite the crucial role the community media and small commercial media sectors play in our societies, including enhancing the democracy, sustainability challenges threaten the very existence of this sector. We are therefore looking at finding innovative solutions to this. For broadcasters, a sustainable model for signal distribution and focused audience measurement are key. And for publishers, an urgent intervention is required to curb their escalating printing and distribution costs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, also with us today is Christophe Deloire, who's had a long and varied career. He's currently the Secretary General of Reporters Sans Frontières, the chair of the Forum on Information and Democracy. He's been the Secretary General of RSF since 2012, but between 2008 and 2012, he was the director of the CFJ, one of the biggest journalism schools here in France. Prior to that, between 1998 and 2007, he worked as an investigative reporter for the weekly news publications Le Point. He's also a documentary film director and best-selling author. Christophe, thanks very much for being with us this morning. Would you like to say a few words?
Merci beaucoup pour
Thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you to UNESCO, Reporters Sans Frontières, Reporters Without Borders, defense journalism, its freedom and pluralism, with a very demanding vision of what journalism should be in terms of rights and duties, ethical and professional rules. And we launched the Information Democracy Initiative a little over 2 years ago. And actually, Joseph Stiglitz was one of the members of this initiative in order to work also on the organization of public space, because journalism is confronted with other types of contents today, and the very organization of that public space must be considered. But there are other points I'll talk about later.
Chinapa. He is the Director of News Ecosystem Development at Google, working on partnerships and collaboration between Google and the news industry as part of the Google News Initiative, or the GNI. Prior to his current role, he launched the precursor to GNI, the Digital News Initiative, or the DNI, Google's organization aimed at boosting engagement with the European news ecosystem. Now, he joined Google in 2010 to focus on Google News and magazines in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. He's worked in news overall, though, since 1994, first in the launch team of APTV, a year in mergers and acquisitions at United News and Media, and he also spent over 9 years at BBC News, ultimately as head of development and rights. Mdda, thanks very much for joining us this morning. Would you like to take a few words?
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone. The joys of being virtual is that one can be almost everywhere. Thank you for that introduction. As Georgia said, I work in Google and our product team on the Google News Initiative, or GNI, as we like to call it, which is our overarching program to enable a sustainable, diverse, and innovative ecosystem of quality news. And by the way, if my video is working and you can see me, I have a silly mustache because I'm actually participating in Movember, which is a charity campaign to raise funds for mental health and men's health. If you want to know more, you can email me. It's an absolute pleasure to be alongside such an illustrious panel to discuss one of the most important issues of our time, a thriving and sustainable news media ecosystem. From a Google perspective, we've been working with the news industry from the very earliest days of Google, starting with Google Search and Google News, where we send traffic to publishers. Now, over 24 billion clicks are sent to news publishers every month. That's 9,000 clicks a second, which is an opportunity for publishers to monetize those clicks, engage with their audiences, and really develop the connections that we've all been talking about and will in the panel session. We also provide advertising technology, which allows publishers to monetize their content, and we work that on a revenue share basis, which generally starts at about 70%, going up to 95% for the publishers. So we work very much in collaboration with the news industry on that. And 2 years ago, we created the Google News Initiative, GNI, our $300 million commitment to enable a sustainable, diverse, and innovative ecosystem of quality journalism. I think I'll stop there because I want to hear from others and also get to the discussion as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mdda. Hopefully we will have time for everybody to get a little bit more into their positions and their experience. But let's crack on with the panel discussion, first of all. And I'm going to head first to Michal. Michal, so Sembra Media concentrates on tackling some of the challenges to the survival of media outfits, particularly when it comes to startups. What has your experience shown to work best?
So at Sembra Media, we help independent digital media develop sustainable business model. Our mission is to empower diverse voices in Spanish media so they can publish valuable information with independence, journalistic integrity, and a positive impact on the community they serve. We firmly believe in starting first and then we go ahead and teach what we learn. And that's why we started with a media directory that represents more than 800 digital media publishers in 20 countries in Latin America and the US and Spain. After studying the ecosystem for 5 years, we realized that innovation doesn't mean the same thing in different countries nor different cities. We have a more profound understanding of innovation and journalistic independence. We learned that real powerful innovations start with cohesion, meaning articulating the business model with a deep understanding of the direct and indirect beneficiaries of the media journalistic service. Not only the audience, but policymakers and activists and herd communities. If you can articulate your value proposition with your purpose, with the actual market opportunities, you can use innovation as a path to sustainability. In Sembra Media's accelerator program, Velocidad, we work with 10 media startups providing consultancy and financial support. And one of the media we accelerate, El Surtidor, a news organization based in Paraguay, has a very particular way of communicating news. They specialize in illustrated news and a format they call scrollytelling, which consists in basically displaying all the reporting in a scroll model so they can manage the anxiety and the tolerance to bad news with a very active way of progressing in the story. So they already have this innovative way of working. We work with them to understand their community and to understand that they were talking to a very young, diverse, and rural communities too. And their goal as a news organization was to give voice to marginalized stories of Paraguay and uncover the corruption that oppressed these groups. So their approach to news was already, as I said, technically innovative, but we work with them to strategize first, to take their value proposition, to take advantage of the opportunities and find viability. So they focus first on developing a local membership for the faithful community, but they also created a Latin American training program to train news outlets to learn how to transform their digital vocabulary into an illustrated one to engage better with their communities. This is a clear role model for the region because this media found 3 international investors. They diversified their business model. They gave their community a more active role while finding a way to scale from a national media to a regional business. And they use this role and this project to also support and create new alliances. So articulating tech and content innovation with business innovation is key to a more sustainable and also relevant media.
Bearing in mind how, the entire global economy has taken a hit with COVID-19 this year, and recovery is going to be hard for everyone, but for smaller media outlets in countries where the pre-pandemic economy was already weaker, do you think that this idea of pushing for business innovation should or can still be a priority in circumstances like this?
Innovation definitely is even more vital when the economy of the country is weak. The market has been failing us for many years now. It's not like news for us. The market was mostly based in traditional advertising, and as we all notice, is no longer viable for these media. So. And if we focus on digital media especially, it's even less functional. So it doesn't matter where you are in the region, or if even the pandemic, it's already a situation we were dealing with. So the independent digital media we work with, which are led by social entrepreneurs, no longer can afford the lack of innovation or a business model. I want to share with you a very interesting case we work with in Cuba. And when the pandemic started, two of the media we work with developed an innovative work process by creating an alliance. They merged their teams to lower their exposure to the virus. They shared their content, tech, and financial resources. And as a result, they were able to develop news product covering the pandemic in the island. They developed a comic series to increase the tolerance to bad news, and develop a bot to fight misinformation and respond to COVID-related questions. And the interesting thing about their strategy and the innovative part, it's not only this merge, because they did merge their media, they merged their teams. The innovative part was they decided to communicate this strategy to international organizations and investors. And as a result of that, they got new investments. And also, by creating these news product, they got more engagement with their audiences. They actually grow in a very already difficult situation when the pandemic hit. So this again is another example where the innovation isn't just a technical matter. When we think about innovation, of course, we think about tech and content, but we have to also think about two key areas, management and business models. In 2017, we launched a regional report called Inflection Point, where we discovered two key, very important points. Diversifying revenue is key in order to be agile in a fast-changing digital market, but also in order to have room to innovate, iterate, and find ways to have control over the editorial decisions. We also found that for journalists, management is such a taboo topic, just like money is. And we as journalists have no formal training in management, and that harms the viability of the ecosystem in a huge way. Most of the digital media we study haven't hired a person to manage their sales team. And we found that media that have at least one paid person to do so have an annual income surpassing the $100,000 US, while comparing to the media that didn't have any person dedicated to sales, couldn't surpass the $4,000 US in annual income in Latin America. So for us, in our consultancy programs, we have a strong focus on leadership, processes, and team development. And this intervention has been more impactful than any other intervention, because when journalists have a strong structural organization with a diverse team, they can innovate and develop better and faster.
Thanks very much for that, Michael. So this idea that, knowing the practicalities of how to build a business, run a business, and maximize on, whatever your passion for telling stories is essential to the viability of media outfits. So we'll be coming back to Michal at the end of the session to hear a little bit more about what she has learned. Before we kind of crack on with the rest of the panel, we're very lucky to have been joined by Professor Peter Gretsky. He had a little bit of trouble logging in, but we've finally managed to snag him. Peter, thanks so much for being here this morning. So what you missed this morning, we've already introduced everyone, so I'm just going to quickly give a little bit of your background and invite you just to take a minute just to share a little bit about the overview of where you're coming from with those joining us before we dive back into the panel. So Peter Gretsky is an Australian-born journalist. Before joining the University of Queensland in 2018, he spent 25 years as a foreign correspondent, working in a variety of patches from Yugoslavia to Afghanistan to Africa. In December 2013, he and two colleagues were arrested in Cairo on terrorism charges. Following, they were convicted and given 7-year sentences. Following international outcry, he was eventually released and went on to become a global champion of press freedoms. He's received numerous international awards, including the Australian Human Rights Commission Medal, the RSL's 2016 Anzac Peace Prize, and the Australian Press Council's 2018 Press Freedom Award. So Peter, like I said, very glad that you could join us.
Thank you. Yeah, I did make it. It's a bit of a nightmare, but I'm here, and thank you very much for having me.
Take a moment.
Yes, of course. So my background has been very much around the intersection of media freedom and national security legislation, but we've also been thinking very much about media freedom in terms of the economic viability of news organisations and journalists to perform their duties, and of course that fits in very well with this particular panel. We've been looking, in terms of national security, we've been looking at the way in which a lot of national security legislation becomes weaponized, particularly around the rhetoric in the war on terror. And that has then been used to shut down or silence uncomfortable journalism. And of course, in Australia, last year, we had a couple of very famous examples. People don't seem to think of Australia as the kind of country that targets journalists. But then last year, we had 2 raids by the Australian Federal Police on news organisations on consecutive days, looking for the sources of 2 stories that were related to national security, but by all accounts didn't threaten or undermine national security, but were clearly in the public interest, but were also politically embarrassing. And so that's been a lot of the focus of our work, but increasingly we've started to look at working out how we can support the business models, how we can support the kind of innovation. That also has been a big topic here in Australia with an inquiry by the ACCC, the Australian Competition Consumer Commission, which has been examining the relationship between the big media platforms, the tech platforms, Google and Facebook in particular, and the news organisations, and we can talk about that later, I guess.
Yeah, so we'll be diving back into that a little bit later on. But you mentioned there the importance of kind of supporting business models, and that's just a little bit that kind of the reflection of what Michal was telling us about her work. Now we're just going to cross to Zukiswa, is also working for an agency that is focused on supporting the viability of grassroots media projects. So Zukiswa has mentioned there, your agency channels funding to projects like this. Now, some may need subsidizing for longer than others. Is that a consideration that affects the way or amount of support that you can offer individual outfits that come to you for funding? This is to Zukiswa.
Thank you, Georgia. Look, South Africa today has got about 271 licensed broadcasters and 6 licensed community televisions, and more than 200 community and independent publishers from almost nothing pre-democracy, Georgia. We have funded about 160 community broadcasters, including 4 television channels, and about 100 publishers. We've created over 2,000 jobs, and about 800 of these were full-time. We have trained over 3,000 individuals, dispersing a total of 600 million in 17 years. The Mdda is turning 20 in 2023. Our support includes direct and indirect grants, media research, training and development. We have also disbursed about 16 million in this year on emergency relief for this sector. You may be asking yourself, why have we not funded the entire sector if I'm talking about 271 community radio stations and we've only funded just about 160. The limited government grants coupled with lack of sustainability by these entities are the main challenges, Georgia. At this point, we don't have a distinguishing factor we use to determine how many times we support an entity per se. For as long as the applicant meets the qualifying criteria, it is supported. We have, however, sought standardized content generation, training and development, operational costs, and capital expenditure for funding. For equity, the entity also tries to spread the funding across all provinces on an annual basis, unless there are serious non-compliance or governance issues with some identified entities. We also support a mix of startup and existing projects on an annual basis. Now, we are of the view that a more responsive and efficient funding model is needed. We are of the view that these entities have different strengths and different weaknesses and require different support at varying levels of their life cycles. The planned development of the sustainability model, the planned development of a sustainability model for the sector, therefore, will be a departure from this wholesale, uniform funding that we currently do. It will seek to identify the unique selling points of these entities, identify what their unique needs are, and pool resources together and almost tailor-make the support depending on each defined category. The research will look at the capabilities, economic opportunities available in each of these geographic locations where these are, structural issues, ability to sustain, partially sustain, and inability to sustain at all, and build support packages informed by these outcomes. Thank you, Georgia.
Thanks, Akisa. Now, that costs money. Do you receive enough funding to do what your ambitions to do what you want to do? And what are the prospects for expanding the kind of funding that is available? For example, are there any plans for working with any of the big tech companies?
Oh, yes, there is. Firstly, I think I must explain that the entity is funded through government grants on an annual basis, but mainly from the commercial broadcasters through what we call a Universal Service and Access Fund, which is a USAF levy, which is legislated. And so 63% of our budget comes from the commercial broadcasters. Unfortunately, the commercial print, due to the economic meltdown, are no longer able to support the small commercial and community print media in South Africa. However, we also anticipate, Georgia, that both sources of funding will shrink in the next 2 or 3 years or even beyond as a result of the impact of COVID on businesses. It is therefore imperative that we look beyond these 2 sources of funding for support. For instance, our Act also provides for us to look for funding beyond the borders of South Africa and go and knock on the doors of foreign donors. And we're gearing ourselves to be doing that. We currently do not get any or receive any support from the telecommunications companies as well. And our previous discussions with these telecoms pointed out that they were willing to partner with the entity in support of the sector, but only in as far as digitalization of the sector is concerned. And we are pursuing those discussions. Even though we also initiated talks with the big internet companies, your Google, your Facebook, at the beginning of the lockdown, because we were looking at increasing and trying to support, to garner more support for the sector. And even though they could not promise us anything and they could not assist at the time, we now have secured meetings before the end of this month, before the end of this year, for support from these big companies. Legislation may also allow telecommunication companies to also make contributions in the development and sustainability of the community media sector. We also think that project or program-based support to finance particular project or program on radio or content in the newspaper can be negotiated with the commercial print houses to encourage the community titles to make their content more educational, in that it compels both the readers and the advertisers and funders to take notice. And we were working on that. Just yesterday, we were speaking and we had a meeting with one of the state entities, and we're talking about incubation programs. We're talking about mentorship, because we need capacity building just more than a short course or a day's event. Content that is geared towards health and so forth will assist, we think, will assist in compelling business and to support the sector so that these entities are able to generate revenue. We need to ensure that the community papers are at the center of participatory democracy by organizing communities where they live, especially ahead of the coming local elections or constituency work, to facilitate accountability and feedback to the public. So those are the plans that we are working towards, Georgia. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Zikiswa. Peter, so we heard Michal mentioning earlier about how the kind of traditional, part of what has factored into the kind of market failure for kind of some media outlets has been the fact that basically the traditional market that used to be based on traditional advertising just doesn't work in their favor anymore. So the Australia Competition Commission has actually been trying to redivert some of the advertising revenue that's actually earned by internet companies back to original content creators and media companies. How does that work, and what's the strategy there?
Okay, this has been a really controversial topic for the Australian government and the media companies and the tech companies, the tech giants. And the tech giants in particular have been objecting to it. What's happened, as you said, is that the companies, as everyone knows who's worked in newspapers will know that the Google and Facebook in particular have sucked in all of the advertising revenue. And we've got this strange situation now where the content that the platforms use to drive a lot of viewers and audiences and readers to their sites, a lot of the content that they populate their sites with is produced by news organisations. But the revenue that the tech giants are harvesting through the advertising isn't all returned to those news organisations. And so what we've seen now is the Competition Commission setting up what's called a model code, which is a system where the news organisations have the right to negotiate with the tech giants for better terms to access the content. In other words, they're basically negotiating around copyright agreements. The tech giants in particular, and by the way, we are talking specifically of Google and Facebook, and I think this is one of the real concerns. The tech companies have said, listen, this is going to break us, it's going to set a precedent that is going to be damaging for our business across the globe. We can't afford it. It's also unreasonable and unbalanced. It's effectively a shakedown of the tech companies, the platforms, by some of the largest news organisations, media companies in Australia, in the country. The media companies themselves have been saying, listen, we have to get some revenue somehow. We need to redress the imbalance. We need to make sure that we're able to draw income from the money that from the advertising revenue that the tech giants have effectively taken, harvested from the old business models. It is highly controversial. It's not compulsory yet. The plan is to make this law by the end of the year. Under the scheme, if any news organisation that wants to negotiate with the tech companies is free to do so. If they're not able to reach an agreement between themselves about the terms of copyright sales, then an independent adjudicator appointed by the government will settle the matter, and his decision is binding. So for all of those reasons, it's highly controversial. It's not entirely popular. The thought that most news organisations would love this idea, but I've been speaking to quite a few who think that it is highly problematic, including a couple of people who think that what we're trying to do is use old analog era ways of seeing and understanding competition and trying to fix that imbalance of competition through regulation. Trying to operate in a digital world, which is completely inappropriate for that kind of protectionist model. We don't yet know how this is going to work out. The government is reviewing submissions, but it looks as though the government is committed to implementing a law by the end of this year.
Mm-hmm. Tell us more about some of the limitations that some of the critics of the current form of the code have flagged up.
Well, one of the critics have been saying that there are an awful lot of smaller companies, including a number of companies that aren't technically considered to be news companies under the definition adopted by the ACCC. So they won't be able to access the kind of money that the system is designed to deliver back to news organisations. Google and Facebook have both also threatened to withdraw completely from the news market in Australia. In a way, there's a bit of brinkmanship going on here, where the tech giants are themselves saying, "Listen, if you're going to force us to play by these rules, then we're not interested in playing at all." And if that happens, then it will have a catastrophic effect, not just on the larger news organisations who could probably find other ways around it, but it's going to have a devastating impact on a lot of the smaller publishers, a lot of the innovative publishers who've developed business models around Facebook and Google. They've developed themselves, they've innovated in ways that explicitly exploit the kind of advantages inherent in the social media platforms and in Google. And so we're in a situation where we're not only using, in the eyes of some of the critics, we're not only using outdated ways of thinking about the internet or thinking about business and trying to apply that to the internet model, which is vastly more sophisticated, but we're also creating a system that favours the big tech giants at the expense of a lot of the smaller, more innovative startups. And so we don't yet know how the government is going to resolve this. We don't know whether there is going to be a solution. But as I said, the government really does seem to be committed to pushing it through, regardless of some of these criticisms.
Thanks, thanks, Peter. Okay, so Christoph, there has been some concern that under some circumstances, public funding of media outlets could mean that editorial content is compromised. So this kind of idea of media capture is really a central worry to UNESCO and to Reporters Sans Frontières, RSF. So what does it take to stop having to choose between government subsidies, which may be essential to the viability of a media outfit, and an outfit's independent media voice? And do you have any examples of good practice with it when it comes to this kind of setup? I'm going to go out on a limb. I can't hear Christoph. Is anybody else having an audio problem?
Yeah.
Okay, unfortunately, it looks... Christoph, just give us 1 second. May the tech demigods possibly offer some support or enlightenment on this little problem that we seem to be having here. Okay, bear with us, just 2 seconds. I'm just going to check and see if anyone's out there who can... Nope. Okay, Christoph, bear with us. I'm going to just segue over to Madhav in the hopes that someone will sweep in and save us all, audio-wise at least. So Mdda, so we were hearing from Peter a little earlier on about some of the efforts to try and kind of address that imbalance between the advertising revenue that being kind of generated by big tech and some of the losses that have been incurred by media outlets in Australia. But besides this kind of idea of perhaps kind of conflicting positions on the financing of media, Google itself has still overall been seen to be plowing a lot of cash and resources into supporting media organizations, mainly it looks like in pretty developed countries. So why is that? Why is this a priority for Google? Particularly since, in some circumstances, we see them as being almost kind of rivals, but yet it's still also a central kind of priority for the company in terms of supporting media organizations. Why is that?
Thank you, and I'm hoping my audio is working. Well, I would say we definitely don't see ourselves as rivals, and actually we see ourselves as part of the overall ecosystem together with news organizations. And why we're doing so much, I kind of think about it for three reasons, really. Firstly, from a mission perspective, Google's mission is to organize the world's information and make it universally useful and accessible. And news is a critical part of that. I think now more than ever, as users are searching for information on the pandemic, racial injustice, the worlds of politics, or really just very simply how to, to work a Zoom meeting, right? But secondly, from a business perspective, as I mentioned earlier, Google's advertising technology business is revenue share based. And therefore, we only make money when our publishing partners make money. And I think that when there has been this kind of purported struggle, that there's been a misunderstanding of how Google's businesses work and how Facebook's businesses work. And Google and Facebook are two very different companies with two very different business models. And the reality of Google's, the majority of Google's revenue comes from search advertising. This is where someone types in, in the good old days, things like holiday insurance or travel or things like that, and you see an ad there. And advertisers only pay when someone clicks. But the reality is that is search intent advertising, which is not a business that publishers are in. Publishers are in the display business. And in the display business, the way that Google operates, as I said, is as a supplier. Which is very different from the social media companies. And I think that's been one of the kind of misunderstandings that's been out there. But finally, I think why we believe in the importance of the news ecosystem is really from a values perspective as well. We believe that an informed citizen makes for a stronger society and a better democracy, and quality news is fundamental to that. And so that's why we had created the Google News Initiative. And, I'd like to just kind of highlight one thing that we did, because I think it was brought up by Mihail earlier, that, that innovation is so critically important to the business sustainability of news organizations. And yet at the same time, we've also had COVID coming in. And that's why actually with GNI, we pivoted our innovation work to create what we call the Journalism Emergency Relief Fund, where we helped over 5,600 local newsrooms all over the globe with funding of about $40 million, and quite a lot of that not in the Western world. And that was simply because we heard very loudly from local news organizations that COVID was having this devastating impact on their business. And therefore, we wanted to step up and do more, because there's no point in trying to innovate if you're out of business. And so I think at the end, our goals with the news industry stay the same. We want to enable a sustainable, diverse, and innovative ecosystem of quality journalism. And from our perspective, we try to do that through our products, our tools and training and innovation, because we see ourselves as part of the ecosystem overall. So I hope that answers your questions somewhat.
Yeah, no, I think we spoke yesterday about the umbrella unfurling in terms of in terms of understanding about your position and some of the kind of goals of Google. But so we've heard from everyone today about the importance of some of the kind of surrounding infrastructure to kind of hold up media organizations to mean that they can, actually exist to do the work that they aim to do. Business models, tools, funding, but content itself is still key, king. Content is king. Is that something that is a priority for Google in terms of, not just Google, internet companies in general, in terms of curating the content on platforms and feeds? How can they do that? And how can this benefit or harm the viability of media outfits? Mdda.
I think it's an absolutely critical question, and to answer that question again, and I say this as a news person, I often joke I'm the technically dumbest person at Google, but I think it's really important to understand the different roles in this ecosystem, and I use the word ecosystem very particularly because it's no longer this kind of linear thing. When I started in TV back in '94, it was very simple, right? But now we're in an ecosystem where there's so many dependencies upon each other. And when we look at, whether it's the technology or the tech platforms or even regulation, it's really important to understand the roles that each play. And so Google is a search engine. And, as such, we surface content and links. So we don't curate content in a way that social networks or publishers do. As I said, we send billions of clicks per month. But at that point, the publishers are in control. They've got, they can opt out of Google Search and Google News. They can also have the controls about what is surfaced via internet protocols called robots.txt. And people opt in because they actually see the value of search. I think what we did recently, again based on feedback from publishers, is we announced a new product called Google News Showcase, where we will license content from publishers and which will allow them to provide a new and richer news experience for readers. And this program will help participating publishers monetize their content through an enhanced storytelling experience that lets people go deeper into complex stories, stay informed, and be exposed to this diversity of information and interest that's out there, while the publishers remain in control. And we're actively working with publishers on this in Germany and Brazil. And we've had a lot of discussions with many more partners. We've signed over 200 publishers, and there are many more publishers that we're talking to at this point. And I think, it comes back to the overarching theme of this panel, which is about media viability. And that's a core focus for our GNI work, because without that, we don't think that the ecosystem will thrive. And that's why we focus our efforts really around, as I said, the products that we do, whether it's working with the industry on things like accelerated mobile pages, which is an open source form of HTML, or Google products like Subscribe with Google, which is trying to make things easier reduce the friction from a payment perspective. But we also do kind of lots of tools and training. And again, going back to something I think that Michal said, the understanding of the business part of this is deeply, deeply important. And so we launched a program called the Digital Growth Program, which was aimed at the business side of news publishers. And we've had, thousands of registrations for this. We've launched it all over the globe. We've even kicked off a pilot in Nigeria because we want to expand more deeply into Africa. And I think it's really interesting to see how people are actually understanding the business side and making it better for the viability overall. And I could go into lots of other stats about what we do with innovation and that, but I'll stop there.
Thanks very much, Mdda. So we're going to try once again with Christoph. Christoph, can you say something quickly? Can we hear you? Yay! We have Christoph. Excellent. Okay, so what I was asking before is about the concern shared by bodies like UNESCO and RSF that under some circumstances, public funding of media outlets could mean that editorial content can become compromised, and how one can kind of set up practices whereby media outfits can benefit from government subsidies whilst maintaining their independent media voice.
On est aujourd'hui face à un...
Well, we have a risk today, and that is media capture. And it goes well beyond funding, public funding, because there can be media capture from private funders. A couple of years ago, we published a piece showing that oligarchs shop about the media in order to defend their private interests, and that is also media capture. And then there's another issue, which is the capture of the public space itself. The way the ecosystem is organized is that it is organized more and more by platforms themselves and no longer by democratic parliaments. So it's the public space, the organization of public deliberation. It goes well beyond journalism, which is subject to a business logic, and we have to move away from that. So there are the two levels that we have to deal with at the exact time where media capture is increasing because of economic fragility, and when that is the case, there is a greater risk of letting go of independence in order to obtain cash.
D'abord à la capture de l'espace public.
So let me first go back to the capture of public space, which I believe is a very important element. If we want to situate that democratic guarantees can be imposed for our own deliberation, for our own freedom of expression, we launched the Information Democracy Initiative, which says that as consumers, we sort of abandon the public space to the platforms. However, democratic systems should have their say and should impose again their own values, meaning the obligations of pluralism, of transparency, of promoting viability of information, a whole series which has been studied and which have led to the adoption of an international partnership by 39 states and the Forum of Information Democracy, which led to recommendations on infox and so on and so forth, and which has to do with the viability and reliability of information. And have a look at these recommendations. Yesterday, Julie Posetti, who is a member of the steering committee, drafted that. And for the implementation, we remain available to you all. And then, as said this morning, we're going to set up a working group on media sustainability, which is the very central issue of this workshop. And then we'll have Harlem Desir to discuss that. He's the director of the Information and Democracy Forum, and it's chaired by Rasmus Nielsen, which is the head of Reuters Institute of the University of Oxford. And here again, we remain available to work with you. But then we have the whole issue of how to fund media and that of the public funding of media. Even a very liberal essayist such as Walter Whitman a century ago said that there should be forms of public support to journalism, that journalism was a function which could hardly survive without any public support. But the problem is we have to make sure that such public support is not discretionary, that it is not arbitrary, as is the case in many places. This support to journalism should not be granted provided that official lines are supported. For instance, that is the case when funds are granted according to the editorial lines of the media. This is not acceptable. We have to make sure that there are some criteria which are not discretionary, which do not decide upon the contents or according to the contents, and which do not decide to whom funds should be allocated. The only rule should be the compliance with ethical rules of journalists and nothing else. So here we have a very clear distinction between true news and information media which deserve public support and others which have a lot to do with advertising, propaganda, or whatever you may call it, but which do not have anything to do with true journalism. And it's becoming harder to distinguish between the two because the media industry as such does not exist really on digital platforms. All contents are in direct competition with each other, and it has become a challenge for the platforms because it's very hard to distinguish what is journalism from what is not. And for platforms, it's very difficult to establish who is a journalist and who isn't.
South Africa has done what it can in a way to kind of contribute to this work of distinguishing, you know, the kind of the validity of the content of, you know, digital news platforms, regardless of their origin as such. But it's created the Journalism Trust Initiative with its indicators for the trustworthiness of journalism. Now, harking back to some of the discussions that we were having with some of the other contributors about the contemporary relevance of generating revenue from advertisers, do you think that this trust initiative that you set up could be a factor that advertisers look to when choosing where to place their ads, that they could work to coherently steer funding towards quality journalism? And what would it take to get a system like that up and running?
Well, the question is today that we have many players of very different kinds who make decisions which do have consequences on reliability and viability of journalism, but they can't really afford to make those decisions anymore. Digital platforms, for instance, regarding the algorithm indexation, tend to promote some media or favor some media vis-a-vis others. It's their job to do that. They have their own criteria, very, very diverse criteria to do so. But the question is that today they cannot really afford, they do not have the means actually to integrate the concept of reliability of information, because we all are a bit contradictory when we criticize digital platforms. One day we'll say that they do not work enough to promote reliability of information or accurate information, or that they exclude contents which are opposed to freedom of expression, and others the next day will say, but you're doing too much, you're making decisions which you should not be making. So we have just to make sure that more is done to check the integrity of contents. So what do we have to act on at the level of contents themselves or at the level of procedures? Now, everybody needs reliability indicators. And that goes for advertisers. They need some reliability indicators before they invest in a given or another media. Same thing with regulatory authorities, and same thing with charity organization. This is why we launched this huge initiative together with UNESCO. On the 19th of December, we published a reference framework under the aegis of the European Organizing Committee, but that applies to the whole world. So we are working on this. We are working on how to implement this initiative, but that requires that for media can really assess what is going on, and we need a certification system. We need a third party establishing that this or that media does comply with the basic requirements which are listed in the 50-page document, which I invite you to read. And then this information should be disseminated to platform, social media organizers, and so on and so forth, and platforms. So we're currently building this market. Reporters Without Borders, RSF, did not used to be legitimate in this field, but we did it. Reporter Without Borders is not in a position to say which media is more reliable than another. The thing is, we just set a list of criteria, and the decision should not be made neither by the states nor by the media themselves. So we are in the test phase. If you are interested in working on this test phase with us, get in touch with us. and then we'll launch this very practically at the beginning of 2021.
To take Christophe up on his offer, please do so. Now, thank you so much for all the panelists for being with us and sharing, just some of their ideas, their experience, their passion for the work that they're doing in kind of ensuring media viability and, in ensuring kind of the content itself. Unfortunately, we're running a little bit over. We were planning on giving everybody about a minute to wrap up. And at the risk of still going a little bit longer than we should, I'm still going to give us enough time to have a few words to our contributors, but really if I can ask you to keep it super short, like max 30 seconds. So we're going to start off in the same order that we began. Michal, any final comments?
So I find everything very interesting in this conversation. I would love to take it further, and I will probably. And I invite you all to contact me, and I will publish my contact and our organization's contact too. From a media development standpoint, I just want to address as a conclusion that it's not everything about money and having the funds and getting the funds towards this ecosystem. It's also about how to allocate that funds wisely. And one great point that I think we shouldn't avoid talking in this conversation, and I haven't heard yet, is also that there is a lack of representation of women in this market. And we found in 2017 that 40% of the media startups we study, independent digital media startups, are funded at least by one woman. So this is an unprecedented data. It's not a 50-50 market, but we need to work to get these community prepared to manage and to have this opportunity to have a seat at the table. That's why in 2019 we created, in a partnership with Google News Initiative, a management and business mentorship program for women media founders. And I just wanted to share this experience because this also has a direct impact in the ecosystem as a market, as a representation of our communities, and also as a path to sustainability. There's no sustainability without innovation, business models, or diversity.
Thank you very much, Michal. Zikiswa, again, if I can just insist on our panelists really trying to condense whatever it was that they were going to contribute, because we're really running out of time. So Zikiswa, if you wouldn't mind just giving a few final remarks.
Thank you very much, Georgia. Cutting shots, as you celebrate the 40th anniversary of UNESCO's International Program for Development and Communication, I would like to congratulate you on the sterling achievements in championing media development and diversity. Honestly, I really congratulate you on that, in playing such a crucial role in ensuring media freedoms and access to information. We will obviously, as South Africa Media Mdda, keep in touch with you as we embark on this uncharted road, at least by us, of building a sustainability model for the sector. Again, we know that we can only achieve this through partnerships, solid partnerships. We will therefore be knocking on doors some never have been knocked on before, to negotiate for support. However, we also believe on building and nurturing a professional and capacitated sector entrenched on its communities. Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you very much, Zikiswa. So when the MDDA comes knocking, open that door, people. Next, we've got Peter. Anything to add?
Yeah, look, I just briefly want to say that I think I commend Google for putting some money into Google News initiatives and other sources, other ideas that it's initiated. But I think any solution that either relies on the charity of a particular company or that focuses on legislative solutions that target particular companies isn't going to work. What we need to deal with are fundamental structural problems that have destroyed the business models and forced news journalists to be very sensitive to commercial and political pressure in ways that we haven't seen for many, in the early stages of the development of the news industry. I think that there are models. The BBC licence fee is a great way of harvesting public funds and distributing it through an independent organisation, an independent body which is free, which is separate from the government. Whatever we do, I think we need to fundamentally understand that we need to find a way of harvesting public money or corporate funds to pay for journalism that is allowed to perform its civic duty, its democratic duty, free of political or commercial pressure. We should be relying also on organisations like RSF to produce the kinds of framework that allows us to identify those news organisations. I think that is a viable solution. We're not quite there yet.
Thank you very much, Peter. Christophe?
En fait, quand
Well, in fact, when players are having problems, such as is the case for media today, they could, on an individual basis, do whatever they can to innovate, to keep their heads out of the water, to make sure that they can be sustainable. However, they fall victim to broader causes, just the change of the paradigm of public space. In such periods of crisis, we have to make sure that, of course, we deal with the symptoms on the one hand, and we support whatever needs support, and any operation is more than welcome. But on the other hand, we should not forget that there are deeper causes, root causes, and that the root causes should be addressed. We should not just leave these media in a sort of survival state. We should really recreate a whole ecosystem which may promote the work of journalism with its demanding value. So there is a social mission, a social value, and the whole legal framework and commercial framework should be considered in this light.
Words?
Well, I think firstly I should say a huge thank you to you, Georgia, to UNESCO, IPDC, and of course, Guy, for the opportunity to be on this panel. I think the only point that I would make, I hope you got, is that, you know, as our CEO has said, we're an ecosystem company, to put it plainly. And so therefore we share lots of common goals with publishers and with journalism, and we believe that it's deeply important. So if you've got any ideas on how we can help, because I think, you know, as Michal said, as Peter said, it's got to be sustainable. It's got to be sustainable, and that's not just about, you know, injecting certain things in. That's why we work on programs that are enabling and sustainable. Aside from JERF, which was an emergency situation, the clue is in the title of the Journalism Emergency Relief Fund. All the programs that we work on are really about enabling and trying to work towards sustainability, diversity, and innovation. So if you got any ideas, send me an email. Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Unfortunately, that's all we have time for. So I'd really like to thank all our panelists, Zukiswa Poche, Peter Grass, Christophe Deloy, Mdda Chinata, Michal Yastrebna, for taking the time and sharing some of their experience with us. We've talked a bit about, you know, just what it takes to create kind of a robust contemporary environment to create the viability of media outlets today. I'm now going to hand you back to Guy Berger, who's going to further explore some of the issues to do with this. Thanks very much for the honour of, you know, pulling this conversation together. Take care. Well, I can't leave just quite yet. Ah, there you are, Guy. I felt like I walked out of the room and left everyone alone. Okay, thank you very much. Over to you, guys.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me, everybody? Georgia, Mdda, before you go, you can hear me? Excellent.